I'm going to record this and put it on YouTube, so if you don't want to be in the shot in the first part, I'll just be recording right over here. So Hogan starts chapter 4 making a note that golf is a game of serviceable misses. So it's not a game of perfect, and to him, the way that we have the most consistent miss is by having excellent structure at the top of the swing. Last week we talked about the swing plane, which is this imaginary plane of glass that extends up from the golf ball through our shoulders. It's as though our head is sticking out of a plane of glass, and the club is meant, once it gets to about hip height, we're parallel with this plane, and then we can continue our turn to where our left arm stays straight and is an extension of this plane at the top. Okay, and so that's to him. If you can get to this position, most of the hard work is already done. From here, it's like we've stretched a mousetrap back, spring-loaded it, and now we're just ready to snap the door. So the beginning of the downswing is started by a turn of the hips. And if we get to the top and we're on our plane, the turning of the hips shifts the plane a little bit. We're not going to swing down exactly on the same plane of glass that we went up. When we turn our hips, the club shallows, and it's also tilted a little bit more out to right field, which is why hitting the ball slightly from the inside is a requirement. So he goes into more detail, says don't worry so much about the shift of the down plane. You've got more time to think about getting proper structure on the backswing, but then when it's time to start working the downswing, you got to get rid of technical. You're just thinking about the hips starting the downswing. So he's got a couple of great drills to start thinking about the downswing. And I just want to make sure we hear more of his words here before we go into the drills. The hips initiating generates early speed. It's turning our weight and shifting our weight from right to left. It's getting the hips out of the way. It's giving the arms plenty of room to pass. And this motion of going from here to here is funneling the force towards your objective, which is your target. It's funneling your force in this motion. He makes special note to say that as we're initiating our downswing, you have to have enough lateral motion to shift your weight from your right foot to your left foot. A lot of people think about turning the hips, but they haven't shifted their weight, so by the time they turn, they're still on the back foot. So he makes special note that as we're from the top, it's not only that we're turning our hips, there's a little bit of lateral motion that tilts the teeter-totter back on the left side of things. And again, we've got drills to go through that'll make this more intuitive. He makes a note that the hip arc, if you're going to trace this in 3D space, remember last chapter we talked about restricting the hips. He used a drill like this on our right leg to say, all right, we want to keep our right leg in that structure more or less as a means of restricting our turn. That's creating this coil, this stretching of the mousetrap. And our hip arc on the way back is a bit shallower than on the way through. So it's going to be a wider arc coming through, and we're going to have more rotation on the downswing. He was saying last chapter that people tend to overturn their hip in the backswing. So if anything, you want to feel less hip on the backswing, more on the downswing. He mentions, imagine there's a big bolt right here with one of those medicine bands. Like if you have an injury, you put it around a doorknob and you're stretching those areas. He's saying, all right, imagine it's strapped in here and you got this thing on your left hip. Okay, as we turn, that band is going to get stretched here, and then that tension is going to help us, again, with the mousetrap analogy, we're going to be going speeding around the corner. the hip is always going to lead the downswing. So is the shift, your hip first? It is a little bit of a lateral shift and combined with rotation. It's sort of simultaneous, but it's definitely not just this. It's this, that. And the downswing, especially when we get into the moment of impact, Hogan called it sort of the impact situation, with this ball in our right hip, he says, imagine a target about 4 yards in front of you, and your goal is to get from here to there as fast as you can. And you get the sensation that you're really swinging with the hips. So if you've got a medicine ball at home and you got a cinder block wall, get here and hammer that thing into the wall, and then you'll start to notice how drilling that, you can see how the hips are really the motor of the downswing. And I'll have you guys practice this drill here in a bit. That's really one of the best drills from the chapter. It's really intuitive, and it gets people shifting their weight and turning the hips. One of the other all-time lessons from Hogan. All right, so he says, the killer for most amateurs is starting the downswing with the hands. Get to the top, and then we swing the club down from the hands to start. So he wants us to get into our beautiful top of the plane posture. Again, left arm is staying long throughout the swing, so when we get to the top, it's parallel with our initial plane line. And then he says, see how much you can drop the hands just by turning the hips. You're gonna feel like the right elbow leads the way on the right hand, but we're gonna keep the arms high as the hips turn. So I'm not dropping my hands there. All I'm doing is turning my hips and feeling like I keep my right elbow leading. And then once we get to this position, that's basically where we're in this little medicine ball, basketball throw situation. But from the top, you got to feel the arms stay high and hip starting to crank out of the way. That's going to make you way faster, a lot more efficient.